Thank you very much for coming. My name is Gary Kubiak. I'm part of the Southeast Michigan 912 Tea Party. I'd like to thank you for coming out on the balmy spring day of 30 degrees tonight. We're hoping for that warmer weather to come. Our agenda for tonight, I've just got a few short opening comments. Then our keynote speaker, Charlie Kirk, talking about generational debt and the founder of Turning Point USA. And then I'll end our meeting with our military moment. So let's get started. Okay, Southeast Michigan 912 Tea Party. What exactly is 912? I get that asked a lot. Well, that was a Glenn Beck initiative that started right after 9/11. So 912, and he wants us to be the people that we were right after 9/11 happened. So 912 is 9 principles and 12 values. The 9 principles are just basic understanding of how to live in freedom, such as the government works for me, I do not answer to them, they answer to me. I must always try to be a more honest person than I was yesterday. So it's just basic fundamentals of living in a free country. And then of course the 12 values of such as honesty, gratitude, charity, courage, and so on. So it sets the stage of being a good American standing up for liberty and freedom. But again, Southeast Michigan 912 Tea Party, we meet on the first Tuesdays of every month and basically the third Tuesday of every month. And that could vary a little bit. But on that first Tuesday of every month, we get in the informative speakers, the politicians, who were not a bashful group from what I've seen, and we do keep those guys accountable and making sure that what they're telling us, they're going to follow through on that. So we really keep them on their toes, but they're willing to come in and talk to us because they know we are a force. We are to be listened to, and they know that we're out there being active. But we meet at Marinelli's. It's just up at 18 and Rochester Road, and it's a good setting. It's sort of something like this, where we've got a private room, beverages and food are being served before and during the meeting. So it's just like, to me, sitting at your kitchen table, talking amongst friends, enjoying a drink or a warm coffee, and just talking politics, which that's what we should be talking about nowadays. Don't be afraid to talk about it. But you can get all that information on our meetings and what we've got going on and who we've got as speakers coming up on. We've got a great website. Okay. Our keynote speaker tonight, Charlie Kirk. I just want to give you a little history on how we came about to get to know Charlie. One of our good Tea Party members, Mary Ann Miller. Mary Ann, raise your hand. Mary Ann, right, raise it a little bit higher. Okay. Mary Ann has some family that lives in Chicago. And her being a good patriot, she's heavily involved in the conservative cause and Tea Party movement here in Michigan. Kind of took that with her when she moved to Chicago to be with some of her family. While she was going through withdrawals being in Chicago, listening to all that other side of the argument. So she attended a Tea Party meeting, not being bashful. She just went ahead on her own and said, I'm just going to drop in and see what's happening. Well, lo and behold, she met a young speaker there, Charlie Kirk. And she was impressed with this young man. And Mary Ann being out there and wanting to do something to help us out, she approached Charlie after the meeting and said, hey, have you ever spoken in Michigan? Charlie says, no. He says, I've spoken a lot of places, but never in Michigan. She says, well, I know a group that would love to have you. So Mary Ann made the connection. I emailed back and forth with Jennifer, which is part of Charlie's group. We made the connection, and gosh darn it, Charlie accepted our invitation. And we're so thrilled about it, to have Charlie here. Then we checked out his website, turningpointusa.net, and we found out that Charlie's been interviewed by Neil Cavuto, Jerry Willis, and Stu Varney, all from the Fox Business, and Rick Santelli. And Charlie is also a contributor to Breitbart News. You can see articles written by Charlie on Breitbart. Charlie just got back from CPAC, so we're not as glamorous as CPAC, but we're all in here together waiting for him. But Charlie, CPAC is the Conservative Political Action Conference. And over the weekend during CPAC, he introduced Governor Scott Walker, he introduced Michelle Bachmann, and he introduced Newt and Calissa Gingrich. And Charlie was great. You can catch that on YouTube or off of his website. You can see that. We've got all his interviews that he did on our website, so you can also check those out. But this is a young man that is making a difference in bringing awareness of our national debt to our young and old, and liberals and conservatives. I mean, we're happy to have him here tonight.
It seems he really is not sure what to say, but thank you. I'm very glad to be here, blessed to be here and around Detroit. And since I'm from Chicago, I feel like we're competing. And I think Chicago's winning for the most corrupt, where I think we're going to see how low we can go. Our mayor, of course, has connections to the White House, but the only problem with Chicago is we don't have a printing press, so we can't keep on getting that money going, which of course Washington, D.C. does. But again, it's a pleasure to be here, and coming from CPAC, I'm energized and optimistic about the conservative movement and the youth of this country. I'm sure you heard the results from the straw poll, but what was very interesting being in CPAC, the majority of people there, and people that voted in the straw poll, were from 18 to 29. And when I talked to these young people from all across the country, the consistent message, all they wanted, they said, I want a candidate who understands the Constitution and will not flip-flop and will stay principled. That's all they want. And when you look at this past election, you have to reflect, is that the candidate we put up? Ask yourself that question. The second thing, they want a person who they know is not going to lie to them, that they know is going to be consistent. So when I talk to these young people, they are militant about putting forth a candidate, putting forth ideas that reflect them personally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But CPAC was very interesting in that regard, being able to reach out and from all across the country get different perspectives. But more background on me. About a year ago, I was in economics class, and I'll never forget this. My economics teacher used to have 3-word Fridays. So every Friday, she would put up 3 words on the board, and we'd have to figure out what they mean. So it was about a year ago, and she wrote 3 words on the board, and I'll never forget it. It said, profit is evil. Profit is evil. Imagine that on the board, walking into your classroom and seeing those 3 words. An economics teacher, holy cow. So I sit down in my chair and I said, well, what exactly do you mean by that? And she said, well, you know, all those greedy corporations and those greedy business people taking all the money away from the poor people, and we need to lock down and we need to have 90% corporate tax rate. This is a teacher editorializing to me. And from that point forward, I took a stand against my teacher, and I got into a debate and I totally crushed her, but I ended up in the hall. You know, that's where they send people that usually are disruptive. And this is a constant theme throughout the fall, throughout the spring, and this is a 3-word Fridays, right? So every Friday she'd write another 3 words on the board. So my favorite of which was guns kill people. Well, that was a great one. She's an economics teacher. I mean, give me a break. So I said, all right, if I accept that premise, can I write something on the board? She's like, sure. So I said, forks make people fat. Right? Pencils screw up tests. That's 4 words, of course. But I went a little over. But the premise that she was trying to put is that, you know, the guns are what's wrong with this country. But it's just merely a tool, is all it is. But of course, this is what our children are being subject to in our classrooms. So towards the end of the year, we got new textbooks. And who here knows who Paul Krugman is? Paul Krugman, the wonderful economist from the New York Times, who wrote The Conscience of a Liberal, and who argues for a collective system of government, for 75% income tax rate, just great stuff. Fictitious, of course. He writes 72% of all economics textbooks in this country. So when we got these new textbooks, the teachers were, of course, energized. They're like, we got these new textbooks from this wonderful Nobel laureate. And I said, well, Obama won a Nobel Prize, really doesn't mean anything. They really didn't make that connection, them being a Chicago public teacher. But in the textbook, I flipped through it, and I said, you know what, I'll give Mr. Krugman, you know, the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he did write a textbook that would be intellectually honest. So I flipped through it, and on page 371, you can check it up yourself, it said, in huge lettering, the Reagan tax cuts did not accelerate economic growth. Huge. I said, not only is that intellectually dishonest, but anybody with, you know, a historical background can tell you that the years from 1981 to 1988, after the Reagan tax cuts, did have, you know, a growth prosperity complex to it. So I brought it to my teacher, and she said, oh, well, he won a Nobel Prize. He's definitely right. So I said, all right, I'm not going to go anywhere with her. So I went to the school board, hit a wall. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take it upon myself to make sure this is heard. So through some connections, I emailed Mr. Joel Pollock from Breitbart.com. I said, Mr. Pollock, you probably never heard of me. I haven't really done anything, but I'm just so infuriated that kids are being taught this stuff. Can I write an article for it? I said, sure, of course. And by his grace, he gave me the chance to write this article. It went viral almost overnight. Sean Hannity covered it, O'Reilly, Greta. And from there, they gave me my time in the sun. They put me on Fox once. You always get one shot. And from there, it just turned into one thing into another. And I said, you know what, I should turn this into a movement. Because I can stand up to a teacher. I'm tall, I know my stuff, I'm confident. But how many kids across the country don't have the confidence, the knowledge, and what I like to call the intellectual ammunition to fight back? So the premise of the organization was, if I could get millions of kids, millions of students, to be able to deter the progressive indoctrination that's going on in these classrooms from the student level, imagine the ripple effect it could have in elections, ideologically, and through principle throughout the country. So on June 5th, I launched this organization. And we're getting all sorts of interesting feedback. So back in December, right after President Obama's election, Paul Steiger High School in Long Island, New York, I got an email from them, and they said, Charlie, you're never going to believe it. They installed something in our school, it's just going to blow you away. I said, I've heard pretty much everything, What is it? They said, well, the administration installed a 15-foot Obama mural that said, congratulations, in a public high school. I said, well, this is, all right, you're right, I've never heard this, you are correct. So again, through my contacts I built through Breitbart.com and Fox News, sent it right to them. Next thing you know, it's on Hannity, it's on Greta, it's on O'Reilly. The administration, through pressure of parent groups, because what we did was forced to take it down and put up a picture of Abraham Lincoln. So I think we can all see, there you go. And that's just some of the networks. Who here is familiar with Northwestern University? Right, yeah. So they have the Medill School of Journalism, which is pretty well respected among, if you respect journalists, of course. And, so around November 18th, I got a tip, and my buddy at Northwestern said, Charlie, you're not going to believe this. That's how it always starts out, every single phone call. They said, you're not going to believe this. I said, I've heard pretty much everything. That's how and they said, well, Northwestern University is hosting the first annual Midwest Marxism Conference at Medill School of Journalism. I said, you're right, I'd never heard this. So I went to the Medill School of Journalism and I attended. I registered, I signed up, I attended, and not only were they outwardly teaching Marxism at a university, not public, it's private, but I started to film, right? I wanted to film them, and they kicked me out. And they're like, well, you're not allowed to be here. I said, hold on, you're kicking a journalist out of a journalism school? Hold on, this is kind of ironic. They said, well, our belief system, this is unquote, our belief system is one that we do not want opposing viewpoints. Think about it. Is that not indicative of what's going on in this country right now? Right? Of course, there you go. Because it's the one belief system. And so these are just kind of snapshots of what we've been encountering. But what I'm going to tell you is how to better message to young people, how you on a micro level can make a difference. So this is happening in our schools. There's really only one thing we can do about it. You can get on school boards, or you can get your children and fellow people that you know to fight back. Because from my experience, whenever I really stand up to a teacher, by the third or fourth day of class, they wouldn't dare try again because they don't want to get embarrassed by some 18-year-old kid who's pretty cocky and knows his stuff. And when I embarrass them, they'll send me into the hall, they'll lower my grade, all that good stuff. But they are more likely to make the education system balanced. But I'm sure all you've heard from young people like, oh, well, I love Obama, he speaks to me. He's so compassionate. I hear this all the time. So how do we deter this? How do we deter this message? So I think that I'm going to tell 3 points. First of which is through history. The most important thing we could do is to teach history, but not the history that our public schools are teaching. Let me give you an example. I mean, for people that believe that the public school system is promoting American values, you got to listen to what I'm about to say. There were rumblings in my local school district to remove everything before 1860 from our curriculum because, in quote and writing, it's not relevant to today's society. This is what's going on in our public school. There were also rumblings to say, oh, well, not only do we not need a declaration, but let's just highlight for 4 weeks what we're doing on FDR, because he was promoted as the best president. And so during my time, we spent 3 days on the Declaration and Constitution through 13 years. From 1776 to 1783, we spent 3 days. We spent 4 weeks on the Progressive Era with Teddy Roosevelt, all these bigger government initiatives. Now, why do they love spending time on that period of history? Well, there was a problem, and then there was a government solution. Right? There was income inequality. Rockefeller, Carnegie. What was the solution? Income tax in 1913. Right? 1899, William Jennings Bryan gave the Cross of Gold speech. There was all this monetary confusion. You watch Wizard of Oz, it's all about how they can't figure out, do they want gold, they want silver. But what was the solution? The Federal Reserve Act of 1913. You read The Jungle. Who read The Jungle in school? Almost everybody, young people nowadays. They make sure you read it because they make sure you hear how bad it was with the meat shops in Chicago. What was the solution? The FDA. So what young people are taught, not outwardly, but through the history, is that whenever there's a problem, the government has to be there for a solution. But what they don't teach them, and this is where we have to come in as parent groups and as activists, look at the year of 1919, a fascinating year of history. Who was president? Who knows who was president in 1919, 1920? Anybody? 1920. Right, Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding took the oath of office in 1920. Right. So what did Harding do that was almost revolutionary at the time? In his acceptance speech and his convention speech, he said, we need lower prices, we need to cut taxes, and we need to cut government spending. But this was during a recession of 1919. So Warren G. Harding slashed government spending, he deflated the currency, he contracted the size of government, and you had the Roaring Twenties. But this is never taught in public schools. This is this kind of history because they don't want you to know about the Depression of 1919. Instead, they want you to know about the Depression of 1928 and 1929, what they call the real Great Depression. But let's study history even more. What caused the Great Depression? In public school, we're taught it's Hoover's laissez-faire economics. That's what we're always, that it was capitalism that brought us the 1928 Depression. But you study history, it's contrary. Let's look at what really caused the Great Depression. The Smoot-Hartley tariff of 1926 or 27, which artificially put boundaries on business to be able to trade with foreign enterprises. The unions, being able to artificially put up wages all across the country to make employers impossible for them to hire. What else? Hoover was a very interventionist president. He had czars and regulators that went throughout the country shutting down business, putting in new regulation. And the third thing is very interesting. The Federal Reserve began purchasing open bond operations in 1922, which means they started picking and choosing parts of the economy that they wanted to see succeed. So you saw a lot of central planning initiatives going throughout the 1920s, and you had the Depression, the Great Depression. But what we're taught in school is that, oh, Hoover was laissez-faire. There was all these greedy capitalists spending money they didn't have and putting it on the backs of poor people, and they got all these bailouts. But the history teaches us otherwise. So what our organization is doing is we're posting the 10 biggest myths you're taught by an economics teacher and how to refute them. It's a huge resource. We're going to turn into an app. We're going to turn into an actual pamphlet, excuse me, that you can give to young people. Another one, who's heard the argument that the Great Depression was ended by deficit spending in the World War II? Almost everybody will hear this from an economist, will hear it from a teacher. Teachers love this argument, but it's an extremely flawed argument because if deficit spending truly was the indicator of the end of the Great Depression, then why did the Great Depression last 18 years, right? Because from 1928 to 1946. But another really interesting indicator, this is what we have to do as conservatives and free market thinkers. Ask a liberal, okay, if we ration our food and we ration our resources for 15 years and then we have a couple years of growth, is that really economic prosperity? Because by definition, war cannot create economic activity. It destroys things. You build a tank, you bring it into battle, it gets destroyed. You've all heard this argument before, and young people start to believe that through deficit spending and increased government action, we're going to get ourselves out of it. But let's look at the history. The greatest year of economic growth in the history of this country, 1946, we slashed discretionary spending by 42%. Cut spending all across the board. And you had these big government Keynesians saying, oh no, we're going to go through a deflationary cycle, we're going to lose all these jobs. But what they did is they restored money to the private sector, they reinvested it, and you had entrepreneurs finally having access